Welcome back to One Brain Ops. So, it was only a matter of time before I decided to start making some chess content, so here we go. I don't know how much of this or how many of these videos I'm going to make, but I figured I would start by just showing some of my favorite games that I've ever played, and what better place to start than with what I think is the most instructive game I've ever played. At least as far as, teaching beginners goes. So this particular game was actually a varsity challenge game that was played many years ago, quite literally half a lifetime ago for me. I was just about to turn 15 when I played this game, and I'm now 30, so yeah, quite a long time ago in 2010. And this game, I had white. My opponent, who had black, was a friend of mine, and the purpose of the varsity challenge games were students who were interested in trying out for varsity would challenge someone who was already on the varsity team, play a game, and then, there'd be a determination of who would make it on. Back then, we had two teams, and when I was in 8th grade, I had actually played on our B team, and my friend who was challenging me here had not played on varsity before, but was trying to make it. So I was hoping to get onto the A team, and he was just hoping to get onto varsity at all. So, anyway, we're going to go ahead and dive into the game. So d4, d5, c4. So back at this time, I was playing Queen's Gambit. I didn't actually know any of the theory particularly well, but nothing wrong with playing the Queen's Gambit. c6, so this is known as the Slav defense. Can lead to either the Slav or the semi-Slav, depending on whether you bring your bishop out to f5, that's the Slav, or if you play e6 first and block it in, that's the semi-Slav. Anyway, knight c3, and the opening is not particularly important in all the theory, so just kind of glossing over that. And now d takes c4, so he decided to wait one move before accepting the gambit, which, this is fine. It's not a bad move, certainly. It's not necessarily recommended either, but it's not like it's a terrible idea. And then I went ahead with e4, which is probably the most principled move. Just take the center when your opponent captures the gambit pawn. This is the whole idea of the Queen's Gambit, is once that pawn moves, you're able to control all these squares in the center with your pawns. That's what you're sacrificing the c-pawn to do. And now, I thought that my opponent might play b5, and I didn't mean to highlight that yellow, but that's okay. That's what happens here on One Brain Ops. It's unpredictable. Yeah, I thought that my opponent might play b5, and that was sort of the purpose of playing c6. Instead, though, he plays queen a5, which is a rather unusual move. And it's kind of annoying. He's pinning the knight on c3, of course. And so that's something to deal with, but it's not like it's all that bad or all that difficult to handle, so just continue developing. Bishop takes c4. I get the pawn back. And now he goes for b5. So could have played it the previous move to try to hang on to the pawn. Instead, he wants to harass the piece. And this is sort of where, when I talk about this game being instructive, if you just kind of look at the moves made so far, White has played e4 and d4 and has great control of the center. White has developed the knight, developed the bishop to good squares. It's going to be very easy to find squares for the remaining pieces, and Black, on the other hand, has made a bunch of pawn moves and brought out his queen too early. And so Black is really violating opening principles. Now, that said, b5 is still a threat, so something that I have to answer here, so I drop the bishop back to d3. And could have gone to b3 as well, or e2. d3 is the more typical square that it goes to in the Queen's Gambit, so that's probably why I put it there. And I say probably, like I said, this game was played 15 years ago, so I have to do a little bit of guessing and get back into my own head from that long ago. But continuing on, Black decides to make more pawn moves and play b4. Now, at first, this does look a little bit scary with the idea that there might be a discovery after the knight moves. In reality, there's nothing here to worry about. I just retreat the knight c to e2, and the point is that b3 doesn't actually do anything. It does check the king, but you can just block, which will attack the queen, and then after the queen moves to safety, the b pawn is going to fall because the white queen and the a pawn are both on that square, so there's no threat. So black doesn't play b3, black plays e5. So striking back in the center, and it is supported from afar by the queen, so it can't just be taken for free. And again, like I said, there's nothing to be afraid of with b3, but I was still afraid of it, so I played b3 myself. And that is probably not a move that I would play today. The first of several in this game that we're going to see that I definitely have grown out of some of the moves that we're going to see, and this is definitely an example. Now, the move b3 does also open up something else, though, and this game went down in the lore of our chess team as the c1 bishop game, and the move b3 does open up a square for that bishop on b2 if I want to develop it there, and eventually it's going to go there. But just kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of this this piece and just how many times it moves over the course of the game. So black continues on. He captures on d4. Knight captures. Oh, didn't mean to go ahead to queen c5, but that is the next move, queen c5. So black now moving the same piece again, having not developed any minor piece, and all of black's other pieces are just sitting on the back rank here, and really I should have probably done all of that in red, but that's okay. So, nonetheless, again, it is a threat, so something has to be done about that knight. So, bishop b2. And it was a choice between either bishop b2 or bishop e3. Bishop e3 is tempting because you're eyeing the queen here on c5, but ultimately b2 is going to be the better square. Just having the sniper rifle across the board, the fianchettoed bishop provides here. And long term, that piece is going to be very good on that square. There's very little that black can even do to try to combat it. And of course, it's also a developing move, and, you know, again, in deciding between bishop to e3 or b2, the other thing to consider is that ultimately this rook is going to come to c1 and hit the queen anyway, so we're going to be chasing that queen out of there, and we'll be able to do it while bringing the rook to a good file later on. So, black continues on with bishop d7, so he finally manages to develop a piece other than his queen, and I go ahead and I develop my last minor piece, knight g to f3. Bishop e7 is now played, so black has actually managed to string together two developing moves. They're not all that spectacular of moves, but you're developing pieces. You're getting them off the back rank. That's what you want to be doing. Okay, so castles. Knight f6, 3 developing moves in a row now. Queen d2, and can black make it 4 by playing castles here? No, h6. I do not know what the point of h6 was. Maybe he was worried with my queen having just come up to d2. Maybe he was somehow worried that my knight might come into g5, so he wanted to take away that square. That's my only guess. And to be honest, and again, my opponent here was my friend, and I might be giving him a little bit too much credit by saying that there was any point behind h6 at all. I've already talked about how there are a lot of moves in this game that I wouldn't have made if I had played it today. The same is certainly true of my opponent in this game. He is a lot better at chess now than he was then. Okay, so continuing on. Rook d1, rook f to d1, I should say. So rooks belong on open files. Get onto the open file. Black now plays bishop to g4, so he decided to move the bishop to d7 and then to g4. And to be fair, in this case, part of it you could say is that he's trying to give his b8 knight a square to go to. It can't move to a6 because that square is covered by the bishop here, and there's a pawn on c6, so maybe he's just trying to make room for his knight. And this pin is annoying, so even though he probably should have castled on each of the last two moves, bishop g4 is not the worst thing he could do. Okay, and now finally rook a c1. So this move, like I said, has been coming for a while. We're just going to bring the bring the rook to this open file and kick away the black queen. And of course, we've got the rook now sitting on this backward pawn that we're going to try to attack. So white has basically completed the opening now. If you just kind of look at the position, and I'll delete some of the arrows and things here. So white's managed to develop every piece. No pieces have been traded yet, just some pawns. Both rooks have made it to open files. The D rook is on an open file. The C rook is on a half open file. White is castled. White has a nice centralized knight at the moment here. The bishops are both well positioned to point toward... Oop, that was a bad arrow. Sorry. The bishops are well positioned to point toward the king side. Now, of course, there is this pawn in the way right now, but that pawn might make its way forward. And yeah, white is just looking excellent at the moment here. Black, on the other hand, is not castled, so the king is still in the center. The knight is still on b8. The rooks are still on their home squares. The queen is out in the middle of the board getting chased around, and these pawns are extremely disjointed because black decided to push the b pawn all the way up here to b4. So this is the sort of thing that happens when one player follows the opening principles and the other player does not. It doesn't take much to tell which position you would rather be playing. It's very clear that you would rather have white here. But continuing on. Okay, the queen had to move. It moves over to h5. And this does put some more pressure on this diagonal. So that is a bit annoying to deal with. It's not really a threat, but it would be nice to be able to move this knight. So I go ahead and play h3. And this is putting the question to the bishop, as I believe that's a phrase that Irving Chernev coined. I don't know if that's his phrase or not. But, yeah, we're going to make the bishop either trade itself or retreat. My opponent opts to trade it. And, of course, after the knight is captured, another knight replaces it. Don't want to double the pawns, so just take with the knight instead. And now g5. Once again, black should have castled. Just get the king out of the center. I don't really know what the idea of g5 was. Maybe he's just wanting to start some sort of kingside attack, which, I mean, if he gets several moves to do it, there could potentially be some danger here of opening up the king. But, quite frankly, black's attack is just too slow. So I came up with a move here that is another example of a move I would not play today. And that is bishop b5. This is what I would call a JV move. The idea being that in JV, if you play something like this, half the time black is just going to take the bishop, and then you have mate. Rook c8, only legal move is to block, and then you just capture with the queen for mate. So that's the tactic here. The problem is that black, of course, doesn't have to take that bishop, and my opponent, although a relative beginner at this point, he did spot the mate threat, and so decided to finally castle and avoid it. And the problem is that now, after bishop takes, which is what I'm about to play, the problem is that I'm really just trading this pawn for this one, because we get bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, and then knight takes e4. And really that wasn't quite worth it. The e4 pawn was a better pawn than the c6 pawn. So, again, not something I would have played today, but it was the sort of idea that appealed to me back then. So now my queen is under attack, and to be fair, even after that trade of pawns, white is still way better here. White has much more active pieces. And I believe in this position, to pull back the curtain, I have the engine up on my other screen here, and I was just scrolling ahead to this position to see what the engine actually likes here for white. The engine actually likes queen e2. I'm not entirely sure why it likes it better than my move, queen e3, but both have basically the same idea. It's just sidestep the attack on the queen, and then get onto the e-file where you're hitting two of black's pieces. And now, the engine for black wants to just give up this knight. My opponent decided to try to hang on to it, which makes sense, by playing f5. The problem with f5 is that now you've moved all of the pawns in front of your king, and white's pieces are going to come crashing in very quickly. And there are many, many good moves here. It's actually almost harder to find a bad move for white. The move I found was queen d4, which I think is the most straightforward, and honestly might still be what I play in this position today if I were to face something like this. Very clear threat of mate in 1, so black has to do something about that. Black chooses to put a piece on f6 and block the mate, and again, several ways to win this. The most precise thing to do is actually to check the king, and then I think the idea is that we're going to just trade off on f6, so trade the bishops, and then the knight can come in, the rook is already down here, the other rook can get in easily, so that's sort of the more precise way of doing it. I went for the more brute force method. I just took the bishop right away, give up the exchange, and then play knight e5. And the idea with knight e5 is really simple. It's just that the knight is going to come to d7 next, and black's knight can't capture it because it's still pinned to mate. There's really no way of stopping this. The natural thing to do might be to bring the rook over to try to guard this and also to hit the queen. Okay, so I was looking this up with an engine to just make sure I had the right refutation. So if rook d8, I'll just make this a new variation.
White? I've almost forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, sorry, that was Fritz. Yeah, Fritz is a little bit obnoxious sometimes when you try to just add in variations like this. I do apologize. So yeah, after this move, rook d8, white will just play queen c4 check, so get the queen out of the rook's path. The king has to move. If the king goes to the corner, it's going to be similar to what happens in the other lines, but yeah, if the king goes to the corner, you can actually just capture, and then after the rook captures back, there's a fork, and you're winning back lots of material, if not still just getting checkmate. If the king comes out to either g7 or h7, queen c7 check. And the point is that now you're going to be able to take with the rook first, whereas earlier when your queen was sitting here, you would have had to lead with the queen. But yeah, anyway, backing up to the actual game, my opponent in the game did not play rook d8, which was probably, I don't know, I think his best try. The engine actually wants to play rook a to e8, which again is just trying to hold off the attack. Instead, though, he played g4, excuse me. So just going for some desperation attack over here on the white king. It's not going to get there in time. Knight d7, as I mentioned, that was the threat behind knight e4, or knight e5, excuse me. So attacking the pinned piece, and after remembering that this piece was pinned before and couldn't move, my opponent now forgets that and captures the knight, and so the game ends with queen g7 mate. And again, the reason this is called the c1 bishop game, if you hadn't figured it out, is that piece moved one time and directly participated in the checkmate on the king on the opposite side of the board. So just a good example of getting your pieces to good squares. So why do I show that game, and why do I consider it to be so instructive? Well, it shows that all that you really have to do to be a halfway decent chess player, at least for kids and that sort of thing, is you have to just develop your pieces to good squares, and then you have to just watch out for tactics. And basically that's all that I did. I didn't do anything special. When I've shown this game to groups of my students in the past, I've always said, I've asked the question at the end, so were there any moves that white made in this game that you couldn't understand? And they would all say no. They all made sense. And I would say that's all that it takes to be a varsity player. So if you think that that's, a goal that's very far away, it's not. You can do it as long as you can just play reasonable developing moves and get your pieces out. And I say I know this because that season I did get on the varsity A team, and I had a pretty good season, and my opponent, who played black in this game and failed to develop his pieces and, fell victim to a fast attack, he also made it onto varsity, onto the B team, and he also had a very good season, and he was the captain of that team, and our A team took first in the conference, and the B team took third. So probably the best season overall that our team has had in the time that I've been involved. And again, it just goes to show it doesn't take much to get good, and that's why this is the most instructive game I've ever played. So thanks for watching One Brain Ops, and I'll see you in the next one.